It's hard to embrace curiosity without empowerment, because if people are curious and they don't see things happening, words are one thing, but when they see action, when they see money being committed, and when they see things actually being removed in process, it gets an inertia and an energy of its own.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book, The Curious Advantage, and today I'm here with my co-author, Garrick Jones.
Hi there.
And Paul can't be with us, unfortunately, today. We're delighted today to be joined by Chris Smart. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Simon. Hi, Garrick. Delighted to be here.
Big welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, Chris. Let's kick things off. So you're Chief Learning Officer and HR Operations Technology, Business Controls and Portfolio Management Lead at MetLife. Can we start with just sharing a little bit about your role and the journey that brought you to where you are today, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Simon. As I said, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And as you said, I'm primarily the Chief Learning Officer for MetLife, have been for the last 7 or 8 years. But the long title is because recently, about a year ago, I added those other areas around operations, HR operations, technology, business controls, and portfolio management. So it's quite a mouthful, but I think the reason I got a bigger title and more responsibilities is that desire that curiosity about sort of trying to find out what other people are doing. And how did I get here? Well, it's a very good question. I look back and wonder how I did get here often. But I started out of school into university, and I'd like to say that university for me was, all about learning, but I think I was more curious about living, and university sort of gave me that opportunity. And anyway, long and short of it, I came out of university, like many people, not sure what to do and more curious about work than what sort of work I did. And I joined an insurance company. I think I was rejected by Weetabix because I failed to turn up for my second interview because I got the wrong date. And that sort of precluded me probably from advancing in the process. And Friends Provident, a UK insurance company, you probably remember from years gone by, offered me a job. They were the first people who offered me a job. And that's how I joined insurance. And I'm kind of insurance industry man and boy. And I went into sales management, and very quickly became very curious about people, managing people at a very young age with a lack of experience. You learn quickly and you learn the hard way by making mistakes. And I became very curious about the behaviors of different people and how when I do one thing with one person, I get one reaction, and another with another, I get another. So anyway, long and short of it, that drove me sort of to more and more into training and learning. So I ended up moving into learning and development. I started running my own consultancy around sales training. MetLife became a client, and you know the story of what happened next. I joined MetLife in the UK with the promise and curiosity of, maybe working globally rather than just in the UK. And anyway, the rest is history. I progressed, got a global role, and became the Chief Learning Officer. And as I said, more recently picked up some more responsibilities. So not by design, I don't think I'm here.
I'm fascinated that you could have combined learning officer and HR tech and all the business controls. It's interesting to me that learning is the same role, and that you combine those two. How does that work?
Yeah, it's, a lot of people ask the same question, and they often say, shouldn't learning be with talent? But when I look at learning in this day and age, there's such a technology component, there's such an operational component of running a successful learning organization. The commercials of it, as well as the delivery of it. Clearly there's a lot of thought leadership goes into what learning you're going to provide and how you're going to provide it. But actually a very big part of it and being successful at it is the operational side. So we found huge synergy in working closer with the HR operations team, the HR technology team, and things like that. And then when we look at business controls, there's so much that we do to support our control functions around trading, around risk and things. So there's a lot more synergy than many people would think.
Would you call yourselves a learning organization?
Well, my organization and MetLife, I think we're becoming more and more a learning organization. And it's interesting because when we talk about learning, I think often we're talking about employees learning. But one of the things that we're trying to instill is that people say, well, learning is this thing you maybe do on the side traditionally. But actually, when you look at the use of data. I say to people, why do you use data? Well, you use data to learn from the data to make better business decisions. When we talk about some of the agile principles of test and learn and iterate, well, that's about being a learning organization. So I think, to me, being a learning organization isn't about how much learning people do. It's actually about learning as a way of working. And I think that's a clear distinction that often we have to sort of represent that quite strongly to business leaders, because, sometimes they've been brought up in an environment where learning is this thing you go to a course to, or you take a course online. And that's something that we're doing a lot of work on.
That's interesting. We had John Hagel on the podcast some time ago, and he talked about his definition of learning being around sort of discovering new knowledge. So that aspect of learning that is something new, as opposed to how typically we talk about learning something that already exists. So it sounds like within MetLife, you're thinking more in that vein of, how do we discover, how do we learn, how do we experiment, how do we find new ways of doing things? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned experiment. I think you can talk about it, but also it's how do you make it systemic, and how do you build in processes to encourage people to do it? And we've had a sort of CEO-led sort of drive to encourage experimentation over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, our CEO has been in place now, I think, for nearly five years. And one of the first things he wanted to do was to harness the sort of power of, I don't think we never really call it curiosity. We don't call it out as a word, but when you look at experimentation, we've had an experimentation fund where people can put ideas for and get, seed funding for ideas. And, I think that's been really powerful in harnessing. I think one of the things about MetLife is we've been 150 years as a risk management company. So if you think about the inherent culture is one of, risk averse traditionally. And in today's world, we have to be much more open to exploring new ways of doing things. And this whole drive to experimentation, the experimentation fund and campaigns and hackathons is all part of sort of moving that DNA so that we were able to embrace all the opportunities that are out there.
That sounds very much like curiosity to me.
Yes, exactly.
Me too.
And how did over that 5-year period, I guess, you go about that change? Because as you say, going from all about risk management and maybe a more conservative and avoiding risk through to all of the things you're describing of experimentation, hackathons, that's all about embracing the risk and taking smart risks. So how have you found that culture journey?
Yeah, look, I think we'd always like to say we've always taken measured risk. But I think that the cultural piece of that, it's more now about not just the assessment of risk, but it's actually about risk reward. Risk got to be taken in balance with reward. And I think, we've done a lot around culture, from day one of our new CEO, they really recrafted our purpose as well, and that's been a big foundation of the shift in culture. And, we have a purpose of always with you, building a more confident future. But the beauty of that purpose is it's for all our stakeholders, whether it be for our customers, we're there for them in their times of need. Our CEO often says, we're not a risk management company. We're actually in the business of keeping promises, and that's the promise to the customer in their time of need. It's a promise to communities. We do a lot, as many companies do, in the communities that we serve. But then to our employees, and that's the real piece around it, harnessing them around experimentation, around opportunities, around learning, around career, and these things, I don't think any of them stand alone. They're all codependent. You don't get people to experiment unless they're curious about what that could mean potentially for other work to do, new work to do, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot around that. And then just really a focus. We've had a big focus on learning to support that. So, yeah, they all go together. But I think it's really that purpose and that culture that's been the biggest engine to make that shift. And look, like all companies, we still have work to do.
Exploration and experimentation are really at the heart of our definition of curiosity. It's like if you wonder about something, go out and find about, and do lots of little experiments that don't break the bank, but allow you to kind of take little steps to move along the way. I'm fascinated by, you're talking about funds and campaigns and hackathons. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of hackathons, for example, that you encourage to enable this experimentation in this highly risk-averse organization?
They've evolved. I mean, the Experimentation Fund, is heavily promoted. Anyone can sign up to put an idea forward that's then assessed, and they literally get granted an amount of money to try things out. Obviously, there has to be a business outcome, whether that be for customer or efficiency or whatever. So I think that's one area we've done it. We also had a whole campaign, around process improvement. But again, that is around, the whole idea of, people need to question things. People need to question the status quo. Is there a better way of doing things? We call it removing pebbles and boulders, so people literally have a whole campaign where people can submit where they've actually improved things by removing blockers. And I think this came out of some of the employee survey data that said that some of the silliest things get in the way of people being able to do more, to move quicker, be more agile. So they started this campaign around removing pebbles and boulders. And I think we've had thousands and thousands of examples across our workforce of sort of 45,000 where things have been made better because employees have put their hand up. And I think it goes hand in hand. It's hard to embrace curiosity without empowerment, because if people are curious and they don't see things happening, that was really a real challenge to this working, but the empowerment has come alongside. And people, words are one thing, but when they see action, when they see money being committed, and when they see things actually being removed in process, it gets an inertia and an energy of its own.
Absolutely. I love that. Curiosity needs to have that empowerment. Yeah. So I know when we talked previously, you talked around how during the pandemic, MetLife sort of pivoted and were able to sort of demonstrate agility and had some significant success around that. So maybe could you take us through some of the successes you had over that period and how that's carried on, I guess, since then into sort of everyday life post-pandemic?
Yeah, no. And I think the one thing about the pandemic that strikes me when we look back, obviously at the time, it was difficult, it was challenging, it was unknown, and it was indiscriminate the way it treated different employees in different ways, depending on their circumstances. But the one thing looking back is it just proved that our propensity for change was far greater than any of us actually realized. And I think the one thing that we've embraced are some of the things that changed that we were kind of forced to change, but they actually changed the company for the better. And, we shouldn't take away from the move, like all companies, from office to virtual, which happened literally, overnight. And that was good. But I think, we also had a new CEO, as I said, sort of mid 2019, and we launched a new whole strategy. The first sessions were starting sort of end of February 2020, and we'd done 10 cascades, which were all planned in person. And suddenly everyone's working virtually and can't meet. And, what do? You don't just stop and tell the investors, we've stopped our strategy. We continued the cascade and we pivoted to virtual. And it wasn't virtual, let's just talk at them for 3 hours. It was literally interactive participation, and it actually didn't just cascade the strategy and get the alignment and the vision, but actually at that time it pulled people together in a virtual way, which was really important from a culture and a community. So I think that was a big defining moment, not just in the pandemic, but also for the company. And then, our CEO and leadership team were fantastic in their engagement. We started something we called Let's Talk Live, which is where our CEO hosts sort of chat sessions and with employees and brings employees in. And it's mainly employees rather than necessarily leaders. And, that was done, I think, to respond to the pandemic. And guess what? It happens every month still. And it's one of the most popular things that we do in the company. It's done virtually. And I think lastly, just the role of the leader. The role of the leader in the pandemic was critical. They became more than a manager. They had to lead in the way they brought people together. And one of the things we also did at the same time was launch something called Lead in the Future, where we took 6,000 people leaders through a leadership development program when I think many others were thinking what were they going to do? We were actually January, February, March, April, launching this. And, we ran pathways, virtual workshops, speaker series, leadership peer circles, all through the pandemic for sort of the next 5 quarters. And I think this really made a difference in terms of people's engagement from a people leader point of view, but also we saw employee survey scores increase and everything. So very proud of the ability to run that kind of program at that kind of scale so quickly at a time of need.
Yes, and it's fantastic to get that sort of result from such a quick pivot to virtual, and then I guess before that, the perception was, virtual, you sort of sit back, you're maybe not engaging, you're listening, but it sounds like you went for the full interactive experience and all the benefits that come with that.
Yeah, and all the painful lessons that go with it as well as you're learning on the go. I mean, talk about curiosity. I mean, I think everyone learned more about all our virtual tools in this. We had an accelerated learning curve because guess what we were doing?
And I know we went through a similar experience at the same time with that sort of pivot to virtual. I'm really, really curious around how now you're seeing things. So having sort of been through that period, and we proved, if you like, that you can get highly engaging, highly impactful learning virtually. Now, personally, what I'm seeing is a strong desire to get back together face to face as well for the right things, for reasons of community building and culture and other pieces. What are you seeing in terms of having proved that it can work virtually? Still, are you seeing value in that face to face time as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we're very similar. We've seen a desire for people to want to come together, but I think that's as much about community and an acceleration of peer learning as opposed to learning from someone else. So I think that we've always talked about blended, but I think we're probably getting better at blended now because we've actually done virtual better, if that makes sense. I think when we used to talk about blended, it was let's use online, get them prepped, and then let's do face-to-face. I think now blended has kind of come to a more true reflection of what blended can mean. And I think there's nothing wrong with people wanting to come together from a community point of view. What we're also finding is, from a sort of vitality of the office, in-person training is also a great asset when people come to the office, yes, for collaboration, but also if you can do in-person training, it becomes an enabler of more than just training then.
What strikes me, Chris, we always being asked, how do you do this? How do you put curiosity into your organizations? What are the pragmatic things that can be done? And what strikes me about our conversation is how pragmatic the things you're doing are. Things like the funding and the campaigns and the hackathons, but also you talk about curiosity is useless without empowerment and the role of the leader. And then your programs like Let's Talk Live, that's something to do, leading in the future another program to put these things into place. What are the other things that you're doing that are the tools that are helping you cascade and put these things into place?
I think I'd be quite proud to say that as a company, we're very practical. Talk is cheap, and it's easy to do, but actually it's putting actions and making things, operationalizing them. I talk a lot about to my team. And we have a digital learning platform, like many people. We call it My Learning. And it's digital. People can go on and they can take as much digital learning as they want. And that's great. But we also know that it's well established now. The 70-20-10 is that experiential learning is 70%. And so when we were first sort of looking at the whole skills arena and what we needed to do and what our strategy would be, we came across the talent marketplace. And we, long and short of it, decided that we wanted to launch a talent marketplace. And my way of describing it, that is operationalizing experiential learning. It's actually putting something in the hands of employees that can allow them to be curious about things outside their job. And the way we run it is it's discretionary effort. And basically the platform, it's a marketplace. People put on projects and people apply for projects. People can network if there's someone who wants to know something about, agile, and they make connections. And then the AI behind it makes the connection. And what I love about it was there was some, I won't say reservation, but some interest in would people be interested to do this if it was discretionary effort? So one of the things we did before launching is we went out to an employee population, I think at least 400 or 500 employees around the world, different markets, and said, if you were able to go work on something new with different people, how much time could you find in the week? And 60% of people said they could find 2 to 3 hours a week, not to do more of the same thing, but if it was something new with new people, in other words, something that they would be curious about, they would find discretionary time to go and do that work. And that was really a pivotal point in the socialization of the platform. And, look, to give you an example, we saw it's voluntary, 70% of employees signed up. So that's 32,000 employees. We've had 13,000 project assignments, 7,000 connections between people, and it's not just satisfied curiosity and made it very practical, but we've seen engagement scores rise. We've seen hundreds of thousands of hours of capacity released. And the one I love most is one employee said, my path has made MetLife seem a smaller place to work.
It's amazing. I was very interested, you talked about the pivot that happened under COVID and so on, but what about in less stressful times? What about, now when things are whatever the new normal is? What keeps on driving the change? What's the stuff that enables your organization to keep on changing and keep on innovating, keep on being curious while they're not under duress?
I think it's a great question because, as I said, when I think about the things that are driving us now to change things, and there's a lot of change, as we all know, around the corner with the advent of AI and things like that. I think our purpose is key. One of the things about the purpose is we're always looking at the outcomes for our stakeholders. So I think a strong purpose and a strong vision is a driver of change because it gives you a focal point as to what those changing outcomes need to be. I think the other thing is exactly as I said there, vision and focus. One of the things I always say to the team is change is hard when there are too many things going on. Because if there are too many things going on, change is a conscious engagement of people to do something differently. If people are too busy, it's really very difficult, to get them to focus on a change agenda as opposed to, say, a run agenda or a BAU agenda. So I think that strong vision and focus and prioritization is helping us change, quicker than maybe we would have done in the past. And when you look at both of those things, leadership's key. I mean, the leadership's ability to drive change has been just fantastic in the last 5 to 7 years. And the empowerment alongside that means that you actually get a force from within, and change doesn't have to be done to, it's done with and it's done together. And MyPath's a great example. We always talk about MyPath. MyPath was built by employees for employees. We got the employees to promote it. And that's just a different dynamic in maybe many big companies from the past.
We're talking with Chris Smart. Chris is a seasoned HR leader with over 15 years of expertise in HR practices. Following an early career in business and financial advising, he joined MetLife back in 2011, currently serves as their Chief Learning Officer, and his responsibilities include overseeing HR portfolio management, operations, technology and business controls, as well as leading the firm's skills strategy and AI capability development. At MetLife, Chris has led key initiatives such as creating a world-class sales capability development program, implementing a transformative learning and development strategy, and launching a successful talent marketplace, MyPath, that we just heard all about. He's also established an HR portfolio management capability to enhance focus and commercial acumen. So we've heard you, Chris, mention AI a couple of times. It'd be great to get your thoughts on what's your stance on AI? What do you see its impact is going to be on learning, on the industry, and what aspects maybe sort of spark your biggest curiosity?
Yeah, how long have we got? It's a big subject and one I know that you're passionate about as well. But look, firstly, it's not new. We've been using AI in different guises, but I think that the excitement, the launch of ChatGPT, that has seen an explosion of interest. But look, I'm really excited about the prospects of responsible adoption of AI. I was just using Copilot a second ago, and I was asking it to do something, and it made something up because it didn't have the right reference point. But I think it's also very exciting for our businesses and also for L&D. And look, we're keen to embrace the opportunities as they unfold. But when it comes to education, the one thing is education on AI is kind of a no regrets move. One, from a responsibility to the workforce. In the end, AI is, whether you're at MetLife or somewhere else in your career, AI is going to be part of how you do work and how your work is enabled. So that responsibility, as one of our key stakeholders is really important for our employees. And then clearly for our business, it's about how we use AI in a responsible way to enable the work we do for our customers day to day. I think what really sparks my interest, apart from obviously surveying, is what is the role of an L&D team if we vision out in, I don't know the pacing of this, no one does. So in whatever time scale, in a totally AI-enabled workplace where I'm talking to you now and everything on, for example, my path, I could just click a button. It's just giving me the information and all the stats. It's to my hand and I'm still talking to you. It's like a cockpit suddenly. And the question then comes is, where does L&D's role and its day-to-day value creation to employees in the business, what does it look like? And then just as interestingly, once we kind of have a vision of that, what is that transition from today to tomorrow's world?
Yeah, exactly that question. Yeah, what's it going to look like? What role do we play? And therefore, what do we need to be focusing on in order to support through there? And I think, we could have many a podcast on that topic alone. So
exactly, and I think, but more tactically in the L&D world, really on the creation of a roadmap, because I do worry that as things come to market, if we're not careful, you'll do this one and then this one comes to market and you'll have a look at this one. And we're trying to build a strategy out on even the adoption and roadmap of what we try in L&D with AI around, efficiency outcomes. What can we do that we do now, but we can do it quicker. We can do it at less cost to release capacity, and making sure that doesn't rule the day against the really important bits about how can we actually use AI to drive the effectiveness of the outcomes for our learners. Because, a lot of L&D in the corporate world is done and we measure it on engagement, but we don't actually really know its impact. And I think AI could really help us there. So those two things are top of mind as well.
You mentioned efficiency outcomes and measurement. And I'd love to explore just a little bit about what is your view of how we measure, firstly, the experimentation that you were doing. And I'm using experimentation / curiosity. How do we measure this? So we're trying to get our hands around the financial impact of focusing on these ways of doing things.
I think it's not easy. I think the first thing I'd say is I'm a great believer in that we shouldn't always look to try and measure and quantify everything. I think a personal view now, but I think a lot of L&D professionals have spent a lot of time trying to justify things that don't need justifying. Maybe that's just part of your go-to-market value proposition for employees, and that's that. Whereas other things, if you actually invest, to your point, Garrick, on money to something you're experimenting, I think you need tangible outcomes, but I think there are different levels. The first thing is you need engagement. If no one even engages with what you're experimenting, well, you've got no data to demonstrate. And then the next thing is, what are the outcomes? Are they financial? Are they time saved? Are they time to competence? Are they, there are many measures, but what I think we try and do much more now is use the measures that we use across HR in the business anyway, rather than trying to find new measures. We don't need L&D measures. We can just, what are the business measures? What are the things that it drives to that they measure as well? So trying to be, rather than being duplicative, just trying to be more complement what's being measured anyway. It's not always easy. And that's why I think when it's not easy, maybe don't spend quite so much time trying to measure the things that aren't easy to measure.
I love that piece that it's just part of our go-to-market value proposition, and that's that. And sometimes that is enough. The people find value in it, and it's a compelling argument. So I like that.
Well, I think you're right. And I think sentiment is a measure. Is it softer than dollars? Yeah, of course it is. But is it a measure? Yeah, sentiment's important. I think, as I say, I think there's a whole range. And it's just important to do. But I'm just interested, Gary, what you said about the changing role of L&D. And, one of the things that, my team will laugh if they listen to this, but, a strong believer that maybe one day soon, L&D will be a marketing organization that just happens to have L&D as a product. Because if AI is able to create, if we have digital as opposed to face-to-face, I'm not saying we will not have face-to-face, but it's all about engagement, and if it's about engagement, L&D professionals, including myself, are not trained and steeped in marketing discipline. One of the things we've just read literally in the last 3, 4, 5 months has started working with our global brand and marketing team and looking to try and adopt some of the principles that they use with clients and customers around marketing with our employees. It's early days, but it's a great example where the changing nature of our industry means that we're going to have changing skills and maybe changing perspectives on what our key disciplines are.
Yeah, I came across somebody the other day who told me that they're changing the name of their marketing organization to social media managers.
Yeah, no, I mean, my daughter is studying at university. She's studying sort of social media and influencers, and she's just gone up on her placement, started 3 weeks ago. And she said, this is great, this job. She said, I just do what I do in my spare time and I get paid for it. So that's fantastic. but what she then said was, she says, I thought I knew a lot about social media and influencers and, how you do it and how you get the best penetration. She said, I've learned 10 times more than I knew, even though I'm studying it, learning from experience in 3 weeks. So it's a whole new world, especially I think for L&D professionals.
I have to ask you, Chris, how do you personally define curiosity?
I'm sure I stole this, but I don't know where from. But I like simplicity, and I define it as, your desire to inquire, because you got to have the desire. And it's just that you can see kids who are curious. They're the ones who ask all the questions. It's the same with adults. It's the same with anyone. It's that desire to know about things, learn about things. So I know it's pretty simple. I'm sure there is, I know that you guys could give me a much more researched but I just like the simplicity of it, just desire to inquire.
Yep, it's interesting. We've asked that question to many of our guests, and everyone has a different way that they see curiosity and a different definition. So there's no right answer. And we talk about it as an attitude of wonder with a spirit of exploration. So wondering, inquiry, and then putting it into action.
Far more articulate than I, Simon. But yes, but that's what I love about it as well. Curiosity can still have its essence for everyone, but be slightly different in its interpretation. That's why it's such a nice word.
So what are you curious about at the moment, Chris? What's piquing your curiosity?
Well, I'll start personally. It's interesting. I was in a bookshop at the weekend. I just popped into one of these quirky book shops, and I was in Cambridge, and I actually saw a book on the history of the High Line. And I love the High Line in New York. It's one of my favorite places to go, to think, to walk, but I actually realized I knew a bit about the background. So I literally from the weekend have been very curious to learn more about the place I love. I think sometimes you take things for granted and you don't realize the effort that's gone into creating something you so enjoy. So I've made a real conscious effort, started reading the whole history of it, how it came about, the challenges and everything. So that is something that personally, and then I'm going to go walk it again with an enlightened, maybe different view. So that's that. Professionally, I don't want to sound on message, but it is AI, but not the technology, really the pacing, the change, the challenges, and as I say, not so much the technology, although we need to know about that, but more just the human behavior aspect of what it's going to take, where it's going to fall over from that perspective. So I think that really, I'm very curious to see how it plays out and to help hopefully inform and shape how we move on it.
I shall pick your brain about the history of the High Line. It finishes just by our offices in New York. So next time I wander down, thinking about.
It's so strange how these topics kind of bubble up and we get this. I was talking to Michael Craig Martin, the artist, who has a huge retrospective coming to the Royal Academy in September. And he's 84 and he has the energy of, somebody 30 years younger, astonishing. But he just mentioned out of the blue that he's been asked to do sculptures on the High Line as part of their ongoing cultural thing. So the High Line keeps on pitching up in conversation at the moment.
There you go. High Line, the highlight. It's So ask me again I'm going to New York in 2 weeks. So I'm trying to read this book before then and then walk it again. And I'm looking for some epiphany, and we'll see whether it enlightens me.
So beautiful. If there's one thing to leave our listeners with, Chris, just one thing, what would it be?
I just think in what is, I think we all believe, going to be a time of even more change, because we've had lots of change, but even more change. I just think the power of curiosity as a catalyst. people have to want to change. And I think curiosity can inspire that desire to change. That's where I see curiosity's power in the current climate.
That's a great way to leave things. So, Chris, we've covered a huge amount. So from your time at MetLife, your desire for curiosity, how you got there, from your time at university, where you became curious about work rather than any particular area, and how that took you then into insurance and through sales management, ultimately into learning and development, how you use data to learn, the sort of test, learn and iterate approach, how you experiment. So we heard all about your experimentation fund, with the way you've evolved the culture at MetLife to be around experimentation and with the hackathons, and move to that sort of risk-reward element. So recognizing there is time for a risk, but we need to understand the rewards for those risks as well. I loved the way you talked about how you've encouraged people to challenge the status quo and the remove pebbles and boulders from along the road. I think that's a very visual way of, how do we remove those pebbles and boulders to make things easier. Then we went down the route of the pandemic, and how you pivoted and changed, and some of the strengths of the approach that you took of moving to virtual, training your leaders, and making things truly virtual, so that you had the interactive elements and the impactful and some of the painful lessons you felt along the way as well. And how at the end of that, we actually can do now better blended approaches, because we really understand what good virtual looks like and the values of face-to-face. We heard about the pragmatic approach, the practical approach, dived into then talent marketplace, my path, and some fantastic stats around 32,000 people using it, 13,000 project assignments, how it's impacting engagement scores, and then the power of a strong purpose and vision in order to be able to become the focal point for change, and how leadership is so key to that. Then we dived into AI, as if that wasn't all enough. Heard your thoughts around responsible AI, how exciting it is, and great to then hear the questions around what will an L&D team look like when it's enabled by AI, and the importance of AI for efficiency, but also not to forget the effectiveness element as well. And then, will the future of L&D be as a marketing organization? And hearing about your daughter's experiences from social media in just 3 weeks, of the power of learning on the job. And then finally, curiosity as a desire to inquiry, and then leading people with the power of curiosity as a catalyst. So what a conversation. Thank you, Chris.
No, thank you, Simon, Garrett. Really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure there's many more to be had over time.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're always curious to hear from you. So if there was something useful or valuable from this conversation with Chris today, then we encourage you to write a review of the podcast on your preferred channel, saying why this was so and what you've learned from it. We always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. So use the hashtag CuriousAdvantage. Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. Order your physical, digital or audiobook copy now to further explore our 7 C's model for how you can build your curiosity skills. And subscribe to the podcast today to follow the Curious Advantage also on LinkedIn, Instagram and YouTube to keep exploring curiously. Find the links to all of those in the show notes. So see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.